Do you have what it takes to be a detective? Are you somebody that can solve a problem, collect evidence, and make an informed decision? Come along with us at Sprattronics Learning Lab as we solve the case of the missing dog. This is Lucky. Lucky's owner reached out to us to train some detectives and find out what happened to her dog. We're going to discover who took Lucky, and we're going to do it by exploring evidence. In this video, we're going to interview some suspects. We're going to look at fingerprints. We're going to explore blood typing as well as impression evidence. Join me and Miss Hannah as we solve the case of the missing dog.
Let's meet our suspects. Suspects are anyone who could have committed the crime. Our first suspect is Vivian. She's the dog owner. Vivian is the one who reported Lucky missing. Our next suspect is Mark. He's the neighbor. Mark lives next door and shares a fence with Vivian. Next we have Rebecca. She's the dog walker and takes Lucky on walks throughout the week. Our fourth and final suspect is Phil. He's the yard keeper. He goes in and out of the backyard, taking care of the yard and the garden. Now let's check in with Miss Hannah and see how we can use fingerprints to try to place one of these suspects at the scene of the crime.
One of the pieces of evidence that we collected this week was fingerprinting. And there's 3 different types of fingerprints. There's arches, loops, and whorls. And all you need to do this is a piece of paper, a pencil, and some tape. So what we did to start was you scribble on a piece of paper with your pencil. So it looks like this. And you rub your finger on it. So your finger's nice and dark. Get a piece of tape. Put it right on your finger. And I like to rub it on there to where you can go ahead and see part of your fingerprint. And you're going to carefully peel it off and put it right on your piece of paper. And then you'll be able to see what kind of fingerprint you have.
Now let's identify our suspect's fingerprints. First up is Vivian, and I see she has a very small whorl right there. Next we have Phil, and Phil has a pretty neat double loop whorl going up and down. Next is Mark, and that's a really big whorl. And finally, Rebecca, she has a loop, specifically an ulnar loop, going out to the right. Now these fingerprints were found at the crime scene, and I see first we have a very large whorl, and that's Mark's fingerprint. Next we have a teeny tiny whorl, and that belongs to Vivian, who lives at the crime scene, or the house. And then finally, this last fingerprint, it's a lot darker than I've seen, but I do notice it has a very large whorl, which that's Mark. Another piece of evidence that we use here at Sprattronics Learning Lab to place a suspect at the scene of the crime is blood type evidence. And it's important to know a little bit about blood in order to do blood typing. There are 4 main types of blood that you can have. Type A blood, type B blood, type AB blood, and finally, type O blood. What makes these blood different? It's the surface proteins that are on the outside of the blood cell. Type A just has A surface proteins. Type B has B surface proteins. Type AB has both A and B proteins. And finally, type O has no surface proteins. An important thing to know with this is that your blood also makes antibodies that attack other types of blood. So if you have type A blood, you're going to have anti-B antibodies that attack B-type blood. And whenever antibodies attach to the blood, it coagulates, solidifying and becoming solid, which means that blood can't pump through the body anymore. We use this reaction to type blood. That means we add anti-A antibodies to blood, and if it coagulates, that means A proteins are present. We use anti-B antibodies, add it to the blood, and if it coagulates, that means B-type surface proteins are present. If no reaction happens and the blood stays liquid, that means that type of protein is not there. And so we use this information to test blood to put our suspects at the scene of the crime. After learning all about blood, our students blood typed all 4 of our suspects. When they tested Vivian's blood, there was no reaction for A antibodies or anti-B, and so we found out that her blood type was O. For Mark, when we added anti-A antibodies, the blood coagulated, letting us know that Mark had A-type blood. With Phil, his blood coagulated with both anti-A and anti-B antibodies, which means Phil is blood type AB. And finally, with Rebecca, her blood did not coagulate with either antibody, meaning she has blood type O. The next thing that we did, we introduced our students to the crime scene. What do you notice about this crime scene? Maybe it's the blood spatter on the sidewalk, the 2 sets of footprints, or possibly the tire tracks. We tested the blood at the crime scene and found that it was blood type A. Next, we looked at those 2 sets of footprints and identified which suspect's shoes could have left those prints behind. Now that you have all the information, who do you think committed the crime, and what 3 pieces of evidence placed them at the crime scene? Let us know in the comments below which suspect you believe committed this crime and what 3 pieces of evidence you would use in court